one you've been waiting for. All right, so a couple things. Number one, I realize the irony of a system that asks you to work 80 hours a week and then tells you we should worry about sleep. So I get it. So don't put your cynical side aside for a second.
That's my entire.
Tolerate me.
Because
Because it's not, I mean, first of all, because there is important messages here. So this is why I don't invite the senior residents anymore, because they start throwing things at me and stuff like that. I'm like, guys, it's like, you know, and they tell me this is so like ridiculous. I'm like, Ron. So, but there is important messages here. So that's what I think we're really gonna take home. That's the most important thing. But it's also a requirement, right? So it's an ACGME requirement that we talk about this, and they'll ask you on the survey. Unfortunately, about 20% of you guys say we never talk about this stuff. So I'm going to remind you that we had this discussion, right, come survey time. But again, there are actually real messages here that we should focus on. So, because it is a safety issue, and you know, and they'll talk about, you know, and not to start off on a bummer note, but the Dion Award, which is the Intern of the Year award, you guys are all Intern of the Year in my book, but is named after a poor resident from, you know, it's a big tree up there now. That's very big. It's a while ago. He was interviewing for a vascular fellowship and died on the way home because he fell asleep at the wheel, had a car crash. So we do have kind of a history in our residency of this being a very serious topic. And so, you know, this is our, remember, when I interviewed all you guys and talked about all this stuff, this was our program name. Can I get rid of this sort of thing? I don't have to look at me.
You're gonna die.
So I don't want to seem. Is that it? All right.
Nice.
All right, okay. And so you know, the point is we're trying to do this in the right way, right? So I want you guys to all be, you know, exceptional, but I also want to try to do it in the right way. And we actually, geez, Brian. All right, it's just all right, it's working. All right, it's just delayed. It's driving me crazy. So, you know, just to kind of big picture, what have we done a little bit to kind of address these things over the years that I've been program director? So we've done several things. You know, we used to have 24-hour shifts for the interns. We've eliminated them completely. We've kind of limited we haven't eliminated the 24-hour shifts for the other residents, but I think we've limited them to really kind of the weekends at this point. And we haven't quite figured out a way. I'd like to get rid of them completely, but we haven't figured that out. We have now a new night system, which I'm hearing rumors actually is working very effectively for everybody. So that is greatly reduced, especially remember we had 365 days of 24-hour call for their chiefs for the 4s and 5s. Now we're down to, you know, 52 times 2. So we do it 2 nights a week, so 104. So we eliminated 250 days, 24-hour call. That 0.4 might be the most important thing of the entire thing. So if you ever find yourself, your post call or whatever, and you just feel like you can't drive home because you're so tired, Jimmy will pay for it. So, right. So now again, that's the only thing you learn, and that they should learn that, right? You can get an Uber or a Lyft. You have to get a receipt and you can bring it to them and no questions asked, they'll give you money back. Right. So they take it seriously, and I think that's pretty good. And so, and if you ever find yourself, now everybody's tired, right? So, I mean, who's tired right now? I'm tired, right? Everybody's tired. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, like, if you feel so tired, it's unsafe. It's unsafe that you can't think, right? You can't drive. You can't take care of a patient. And if you ever feel that way, then you just have to, you know, just tell us. And we will intervene and we will find a way to make sure you get the sleep you need, but also that we don't put you in a bad position, whether it's for yourself or for your patient. And we genuinely mean that, all right? Despite the fact that everybody thinks this is cynical talk and yada, yada, yada. All right, and it's just gonna drive me crazy. Okay. All right, so some basic, so we're gonna kind of go over all the factors, you know, sleepiness and whatnot, kind of talk about the impact. I think you probably understand some of this stuff, recognize this, you know, these symptoms in yourself and others, and, you know, challenge some of the misconceptions that we all have. And so in some ways try to adapt as best we can to the system that we're subjected to. And so this is this is like quote unquote because drivers over there laughing, but it's also true, right? Like, so when people talk about how to brainwash people in the 60s and stuff like that, they look at all this stuff and they say deprive them of food, deprive them of sleep, and do all this stuff, and they say, hey, it sounds like residency, right? But that's what we're kind of talking about. But it's a real problem and probably underestimated, like many health problems that we deal with. And so this is just a slide that kind of demonstrates where theory residents are on the sleepiness scale. And you're kind of up there with narcoleptics. And I remember when I was a resident, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she would tell me all the different places that I have fallen asleep, which include, a concrete jungle where I just lay down and fell asleep. It includes the front door of a fancy country club where there was a wedding, and everybody thought I was just passed out drunk and I was just asleep. It includes the 16 Chapel, where they have a picture of me in Italy sitting in the corner. Various places they have found me, and my mother-in-law to be, who never understood, at the Christmas table of my new girlfriend. And she's one woman looking at me going, why don't you just go to bed? Sleep at the Christmas table. That was not awesome. But I managed to marry her anyways. It did work. So we don't know a lot about it. Why do we get away with it? Because we can't test for it, truthfully. Like if we had alcohol and drugs, we tested for all that stuff. But we can't test for it. And there's a long-standing culture of medicine that says we just deal with it, right? And if you don't sleep, you're really super dedicated doctor. But the reality is we all need it. And so what causes it? What causes all the sleepiness and some of the myths? These noon conferences really suck. Like this talk sucks. But the truth is, if you're not sleepy, it is true that when you fall asleep in conference, but a lot of that is to do with the lack of stimulation. It also means you're sleepy and then you fall asleep, right? It all leads to this kind of daytime sleepiness. This is what we're really fundamentally talking about. And insufficient sleep, ultimately, it makes it hard to kind of recover, right? So these and fragmented sleep. So even this is what I complain about. Like when people are calling me all night long, it just interrupts your sleep, and that kind of, even though you quote unquote get 8 hours, if you're woken up every hour, it's very, very difficult. Especially if you're doing night rotations and stuff, your circadian rhythms are all kind of worked off, and then probably most of you don't have primary sleep disorders, but you could in theory have a primary sleep disorder. Again, some more myths that we've got to sleep. One of those people that need 5 hours of sleep. So none of this applies to me. And there are some people, truthfully, that seem to. It seems to me there's some people out there that claim this is true. It's not me, but most people need some degree of sleep stuff, and so it's really hard for them to accurately judge by themselves. And it's kind of genetically coded. I mean, you need X amount of sleep. Ironically, LeBron James talks about this a lot. Right? For him to actually make sure that he performs at the top of his level, he talks about making sure he gets enough sleep at night. And in general, that kind of is in the 8-hour range. Now, this is where everybody laughs because nobody's getting 8 hours of sleep at this point. But nevertheless, that's kind of the overall average of what people tend to need. If you do kind of accumulate sleep debt, right? So the more you don't sleep, the drier you get, and as that goes on, it's harder to make that up. And it's why vacation quote unquote recharges you. This is also why at one point in your life, 2-week vacation. Well, the interns know this, right? 2 weeks vacations are really nice because the first week you're kind of just you're settled, and then the second week you really say, "Wow, this is like vacation. I'm really enjoying myself." And so I'm about to go on my 2-week vacation, which I love. What's some other things? So obviously the circadian rhythm, it really does impact you. It's in general easier to stay up late than fall asleep earlier. It's kind of easier to go the day, evening, night rotation. Obviously, to some extent, you don't have a lot of control over that. I think the transition from nights to days can be tough as well, right? The quote unquote night owls, seem to adapt a little bit better. Who's a night? Isn't we here a night owl? It's do you guys the transition is not too bad? Do you do? Were you always night owls? Were you just up late college and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. My son's a little like that. It drives me crazy. He's down there. Like, what the hell is going on? You should be in bed. And then he won't get up, right? Do the night owls have that problem? Not being able to get up the next morning? All right, so you know, can you learn to adapt? And the reality is you really can't. We cope, but we don't really adapt, right? You know, that's just the bottom line. You need to such. And so we can adapt, and this is actually your Chrome wrote about this about postoperative complications when you're post-call, and they've not been able to show any correlation about being post-call and having complications, but that's because you're super focused, but you might not be an optimal. And also what I have found is that like for manual tasks, when I once did this thing and going overseas and all this, and they did a whole bunch of stress testing on us, and they made us tired on purpose, and then they had asked us to do things. I mean, they made us really tired. And I was really shocked that like if they asked me to like, you know, carry, you know, the water from there to there, that was not a problem. But when they asked me to like add simple numbers, I was like really struggling because I was so tired. But cognitive tasks, I think, are a little bit harder than manual tasks. And if you're a surgeon and you really know how to operate and you're really focused, you usually can kind of overcome it, but you're probably not performing at your top performance. There you go. And so I think this is the other part that I think is most important. You know, what I have seen personally, but also I think as a program director is, you know, we've already alluded to, you know, this part, but really what I've seen is kind of relationships and professionalism issues. Like that's where things break down. When you get tired, you get testy. And when you get testy, especially if you're you know, Irish Catholic background like myself, where you just have a little anger in you already, right? Then you get a little tired, and then you get really snippy and potentially nasty. And the next thing you know, you're telling the medical resident staff off. And next thing you know, you're getting written up. And next thing you know, I'm talking to you. And next thing you know, we've got a problem, right? So, and that's a lot to do with the fact that your defenses are down and you're just not being able to cope the way you normally cope. Like if you were well rested and something happened, you'd probably count to 10 or whatever, and you'd interact in a positive way. But when you're not, you get nasty. And that's a problem. And my wife recognizes that in me. She'll even tell me. She says, she'll look at me as I walk out the door. You look really tired. Keep your mouth shut today. Right? That's how I get in trouble. So, and obviously there's other things as well, but I think that's where I really see it come out. I mean, most of the time you guys, I mean, yes, you make mistakes. And I'm sure there are some of the things that we don't, maybe we can't even measure, but what I actually see is usually social interactions. And, you know, there is other data to support that we make more errors, both in medicine and pediatrics, you know, when we're taking a lot of shifts and whatnot. And so this was some stuff that they did in all the different specialties to demonstrate that. And we alluded to this, you know, I don't think this affects us as much, but like, you know, if you read like House of God and all these books like this, they talk about this all the time, right? The patient becomes the enemy. Like in surgery, it doesn't tend to be that way because like operate so much and, you know, I'm going to operate, we're not operate on patients, but nevertheless, it can feel like, you know, another ED is a hit, right? It's not, you know, an opportunity to help people. It just feels like work. And then you know, there's other side effects, and this is the study from that just shows, sorry, I just skipped to that. The, you know, making medical errors based on, you know, amount of sleep, or also, you know, reporting, you know, conflicts with staff. So you can see the less sleep you get, the more errors you're making, and, you know, and that's goes up a bit, sorry, but what really goes up a ton is the interactions with staff. So, you know, in order to be alert, take the best possible care of your patient, you have to take care of yourself. So this is another kind of graph kind of demonstrating all of this. You know, people in residency tend to be weight gainers or weight losers. I was a weight gainer, which was not super awesome, but some people, but it's not uncommon that people have changes in weight, and you can see it's also related to how much you sleep in, but also report, medical use and alcohol use, things like that. So that, all kind of has consequences. We alluded to this already. How many, and I hate to ask, how many people have fallen asleep at a red light? Yeah, I mean, it's, hopefully it's happening a little less often because again, we're not taking these long calls, but I remember driving home and, stop at a red light, next thing I know, I'm asleep. And that's obviously dangerous. And then, mistakes. So, and then you can't learn, right? So at some point you can't learn, right? So this idea that, I need to take 36 hours, I got to see the natural history of the patient, yada, 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 probably was a bit of a myth because at some point you're just, muddling through and trying to get through and you're not really learning as much as you should be. And then ultimately, if you're not sleeping, people don't tend to be, they don't tend to be happy. That's the bottom line. It's a little harder to be, engaged in the operation and all of that. I remember as an intern actually falling asleep during an operation, bumping my head on the microscope as the neurosurgeon said, "Could you stop bumping the microscope with your head?" And I'm like, "Oh, sorry, sir. I'm trying to stay awake." Chelsea tells you how interesting that operation was to me. So, recognizing the sleep and, problems in yourself, if you're really kind of struggling, then, I need to get some sleep. And we've already talked about this part of it. This is partly why we've really worked hard to kind of get away from doing, this many hours continuously, right? And then unfortunately, the fact is that, again, this probably applies more to medical rounds. This is why we all don't like medicine, right? But like if this is the time you're supposed to be maximally awake and you're probably maximally asleep, right? You're up all night and you're rounding and you're going, "Oh my God, I'm gonna kill myself if I don't get out of here." And so we don't want to do this to anybody for any reasons. Even if you're awake, we don't want to do that. You can sometimes tell how tired, and you can kind of have a sense of, when you're okay, but when you're not okay, but, probably underestimate it, we underestimate everything, underestimate a lot of things in life. And then, and it's true that as you're impaired, if you will, then you're actually have better, your judgment's not as good. Yeah. Just talked about that. I mean, Trevor's notorious for it. He's like always asleep. Trevor apparently, I've heard he falls asleep consenting patients sometimes. Like he's sitting there and yet he gets away with it all the time. Now the one thing that he has is this unique skill is he'll be asleep in the corner. I know he's not paying attention at all. And somebody will ask him a question and he'll give an intelligent answer. And I'm like, how the hell did you were asleep? But he has a special skill. But again, that's probably not the message I'm trying to send. If you're falling asleep routinely in conferences and things like that, probably means you're not getting enough sleep. And if you feel like you're checking your work repeatedly, that's another one. I was dictating and I dictated, then we opened the abdomen and it was vancomycin resistant. So that was literally what I said in the dictation. So and then I listened to it and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like talking gibberish. And that was clearly the sleep deprivation problem. And then I woke up in the corner with my dictation phone and drooling, and one nurse had put a blanket over me, which was very nice of her. I had to redo all my dictations. And you're not going to do anything about it. So some strategies, some myths, I'm just going to power through, but that's not going to really help. And napping, makes me feel worse. So I'm not going to nap. I'm just going to, try to dig it out. Probably did this in college too. I got pulling all nighter to get the paper done. And still, in reality, little sleep is better than no sleep, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then, this whole idea of napping, which always sounds a little silly, when you say it to a bunch of adult people, they're saving lives quite literally. but you know, a key nap actually can be quite effective. And how did I learn that? Well, I'll tell you how I learned that in a second. They can help. You know, certainly if you're you're gonna have a long shift, you're gonna be on the 24-hour trauma shift. You know, try to get some good night's sleep the night before, and then even on the job if you can do this. And so, short naps actually are effective. You know, and the shorter ones, you can sometimes wake up and not have that whole, you know, that whole grogginess when you guys call me and I say, like, what did you just tell me? I have no idea what you just said. Give me a minute. When you see free air, that's my sleep inertia immediately goes away. But all the other stuff, I just kind of snapped through. So, you know, how did I learn all this? You know, I learned this driving my daughter around for soccer games all the time. Right, so we'd drive all, you know, for hours and then watch, and she was tired, but I was sitting in the hot sun, so I was tired to drive home, and I'd be nodding off on the way home, and I'd just say, you know, we got to pull over, and I'd pull over in this gas station, and she'd play on her computer or whatever, and I'd sleep for half an hour, and then I could finish the ride home. But it was like I could feel it was dangerous because I could feel my head doing this, right? And so the naps do actually work if you have the opportunity to take them. You know, there's some, you know, classic windows, you know, the, you know, 2 to 5, et cetera. But the reality is you can sleep, if you got a little, you know, opportunity to sleep, take advantage of it. There's a slow time if you're on call in the middle of the night, things aren't going on, take advantage of it. You know, again, we talked about this a little bit. If you know you're going to have a long shift, try to get a good night's sleep. You know, that's not the night to go out and think about your professional life as well. You know, this is another myth. This truly, this gets worse as you get older, by the way. But I find myself the night on call, sometimes the next day I'm okay, the day after I'm really tired. Right. So, so I think that it does take a couple nights to really get over all this stuff. You know, if you know, if you can do this, you know, it's a little harder when you're a resident. I unfortunately I tend to fall asleep at 8 o'clock and every night now, and I wake up at 3 in the morning and I start emailing people, which is probably not a good health strategy, by the way. But that's my routine at this point. And there are, you know, different relaxation ways. You know, what you don't want to do is use drugs and alcohol, things like that, to kind of help you sleep. That's not a healthy way to handle it. You know, being cooler, dark, quiet. Those lovely call rooms are all dark and quiet. Are they cool? They're kind of like dungeon like, but they are dark. The problem is you have no idea what time it is when I sleep down there. And these are some other things that we probably have learned over the course of our lifetime. You know, this is, you know, we talked about this at the very beginning. You know, this is a real danger. So like if this is happening to you, just please get a lift, get an Uber. Jimmy will pay for it. Pull over, take a nap, walk, you know, whatever it is. But this is a real problem. And these are other factors that can, you know, talk about, you know, problems when if you're driving and you're sleeping and if you're driving and you're sleep deprived, and, you know, especially if you're going on vacation or something like that, just take the time to make sure that you're prepared for that long ride. Sorry. We've already alluded to all of this, especially the take the nap thing. I guess they talk about drinking coffee. I guess that can help. But I mean, what's really helped for me is taking a nap. And then I really can drive after that. And I don't have a problem. But I do have to take a nap. It doesn't work, you know. All the other things I've tried, yeah, they don't work. I don't know, they seem to work for at least for a moment or two, but they ultimately and then, you know, when I was in college, I had my mailbox mate, her and her sister died. This is exactly what happened. She fell asleep at the wheel and ran into the bridge. You know, I feel a little uncomfortable. This came from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, but I'm not sure I can tell you what drugs to use or don't use, but I think in general, probably any drug is probably not a great idea. Certainly we don't want to be using illegal drugs and alcohol, or, you know, if you're using those to sleep, then we should be talking and trying to figure out ways to help you. You know, I mean, I guess there is some evidence for caffeine, but again, I'm not necessarily advocating, you know, living on caffeine. I think better off, we should try to do what we can in the environment to allow you guys to get the proper sleep that you need. You know, I wish there was a magic bullet. Perhaps the system is evolving over time. I think there are some things that are better, there are some things that are clearly the same. But it is kind of a shared responsibility for all of us to try to create a working environment where you guys can be as healthy as possible. So, you know, the bottom line is, you know, sleep deprivation is just an impairment like anything else. And so we have to do our best to try to take care of each other and take care of ourselves. I totally get the irony, once again, of the system that says we want you to work 80 hours a week and we want you to do all this stuff, and then says we're worried about how much you're sleeping. I get that part of it, but nevertheless, that's the environment that we are currently working in. And so we just have to, you know, kind of make our best to try to optimize this stuff. But it doesn't change these facts, right? Like, you know, we do want to create the best environment that we can, given some of the circumstances that we live under. I think Robbie and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday. You know, it's an amazing job. It's really a great way to interact with the world. It's you know, I couldn't imagine doing anything else in my life. I do wish I slept, but that's just the bottom line. And I do on the weekends, I'd love to something better than, you know, waking up at 10 in the morning. On Twitter or something, someone asked, can I be a certain if I'm not a morning person? The answers, including mine, was absolutely. I am not a morning person. I hate the freaking morning. But you know, but I've learned to adapt, right? So I've learned to adapt, and because I like my job and that requires me to be a morning person. I wish I was a morning person, but for the night owls out there, you probably feel the same way. I know there's a few morning people here that just say, I love it, you know, but I think Robbie, I think, is a morning person. He's like, yeah. So, you know, that's the bottom line. You know, I do, like, in all seriousness, like, I want you guys to be safe. That's first and foremost. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed, whether it's sleep or whether it's other things, please reach out to, and this is another thing that people say on our survey all the time. We don't have a process to deal with transition of care if I'm tired. We do have a process, right? Like, you know, we don't say like, oh, Robbie's tired, you know, Ben takes over. I mean, I don't have that. If they're blue turn, so they're orange. But the process is, if you go to your chief resident and or me, or a faculty member or anybody, and say, I'm too tired to do this, then we will make sure that you get home and need to do whatever you need to do. Or my grandmother's died, or this happened, or this is going on. We have been very good about this. This is one thing I'm proud about. And truthfully, it's you guys who are good about this. Now, it does ultimately mean we have to kind of find somebody else to fill in the gaps, and that's sometimes the hard part. But we've always been able to fill in the gaps. So that is the process. So we do actually have a process. It might not feel like one because it's not written down like an algorithm. We have to figure it out every single time, but we're able to do that. And we do take it seriously. So please make use of the process if you feel like it's necessary. All right, I've tortured you guys enough. Hopefully, you know, you got something out of it. You know, at the very least, you can check that we did it. But like I don't really want to just feel like that's why we did it. I do think there are important messages here that I hope we all kind of take seriously. And I appreciate you guys giving me the time and nobody throwing anything at me. All right, let's take a break and then we'll have an amendment. Thank you.